The funny thing about pretending to be blind is that, for the first time in his life, Jimmy started to really see. The official story came out on a rainy Thursday morning. News headlines screamed, "Billionaire basketball legend, Jimmy E's, loses his sight overnight." Social media filled with prayers, fake sympathy, and people using his tragedy for content and clout. Doctors did interviews. Lawyers released statements. Staff whispered in hallways. But inside the mansion perched on the hill, where money flowed like water and silence was often expensive, his wife's reaction mattered more than the world's. Elizabeth. She walked into the room where Jimmy sat, eyes half closed, the curtains drawn. The air smelled like antiseptic and expensive cologne. Machines softly beeped beside the bed, not because he needed them, but because the doctors insisted on monitoring stress. She stood at the door for a few seconds, watching him, that if he wasn't pretending to be blind, maybe he wouldn't have noticed that pause. But now, every second felt louder. Every breath, every shift in the air, every unspoken word. "Jimmy," she finally said, her voice soft. Almost too soft. He turned his face toward her, like a man searching for light he'd never see again. "Liz," he replied, letting his voice tremble just enough. "Is that you?" She came closer. The perfume he'd grown used to over 13 years wrapped around him, sweet, expensive, suffocating. Her hand touched his shoulder. "I'm here," she whispered. To anyone standing at the door, it would have looked like a loving moment. A loyal wife comforting her wounded husband, but Jimmy felt it, that slight stiffness in her fingers. That half-second delay before she touched him, like someone forced to pet an animal they were secretly afraid of. I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said. He smiled sadly. "Me too." She sat on the edge of the bed. "The doctors said, this could be permanent." "That's what they are saying," Jimmy answered. Even though the cancer diagnosis stayed hidden, the blindness story was solid. The doctors, bound by confidentiality and paid extremely well, confirmed that complications from an undisclosed illness had damaged his optic nerves. Elizabeth sighed, the dramatic kind people do when they know someone is watching, only this time, she thought no one could see her. "Don't worry," she added, "I'll take care of you." The words sounded beautiful. But in Jimmy's ears, they rang hollow, because love says, "We're in this together." Convenience says, "I'll take care of you, as long as it benefits me." Jimmy never planned to fall into Elizabeth's world. He was a young university athlete, a rising basketball star with dreams too big for his empty pockets. His shoes were worn thin, and his meals were often skipped, but his spirit was untouchable. The court was his kingdom, and the sound of bouncing basketball was his heartbeat. Then one day, his fate changed, the moment she walked in. Elizabeth, the only daughter of Mr. Thompson, the club owner, her perfume entered the gym before she did. Her laughter echoed through the walls like money itself. Everyone knew who she was, and everyone stayed out of her way. Everyone, except Jimmy. That day, Jimmy had just finished practice when his coach whispered something that would change his life forever. "The boss's daughter likes you, Jimmy. Play smart. Play smart." Those two words stuck in his head. He didn't think much of it until the next week, when Mr. Thompson himself invited him to dinner. It wasn't really an invitation, it was a command. And when Jimmy arrived, there she was again, Elizabeth, dressed like she was walking into a movie scene, her eyes scanning him like prey. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind that says, "I get what I want." Jimmy smiled back, because what else could he do? The club owner was offering him something every player dreamed of, a scholarship, sponsorship, a future, but there was a catch. That catch came in a silk dress and red lipstick. Elizabeth didn't love Jimmy, she didn't even like him, but she saw something in him, a ticket out of her father's shadow, and a key to her own wealth someday. So, she played her part. She called him, texted him, and came to his games. She sat in the front row and cheered loud enough for her father to notice, and just like that, Jimmy was safe. His place on the team was secure. His name started making headlines. The boy who came from nothing was suddenly on every magazine cover. But inside, Jimmy knew the truth. She wasn't with him for love, and worse, he wasn't with her for love either. At first, it was a transaction of convenience. He needed opportunity, she needed potential. But life has a cruel sense of humor. Somewhere between the fake smiles and rehearsed kisses, he started loving her. But Elizabeth never gave him a reason to believe she felt the same. She was always distant, her laughter always a little too rehearsed. She liked expensive gifts, not affection. And every time he tried to open up, she deflected with sarcasm or silence. Still, Jimmy convinced himself, maybe one day she'll love me back. Years passed. They got married. Jimmy became a billionaire. The boy who once borrowed sneakers now owned teams. Houses. Islands. But money can't buy peace, and every time he looked at Elizabeth, he saw the same cold distance in her eyes. He often wondered what would happen if he lost it all. Would she stay? Would she even care? But the real test came not when he lost his money, but when he began to lose himself. It started with fatigue. Then pain. Then endless hospital visits, and finally, the verdict: cancer stage 4. 6 months to live. Jimmy sat in his car that day, staring at the report in his trembling hands. The letters blurred through his tears. He wasn't afraid to die, but he was afraid to die not knowing the truth. He could give her everything: houses, cars, millions, but would she shed a tear for him if she knew he was dying? Would she sit beside his bed if there was no inheritance waiting for her? That's when he decided that he wouldn't tell her, not yet. Instead, he'd run one final test, one last game of deception, the same way their story began. He'd pretend to be blind. To see who she truly was, when she believed he could no longer see her. And so, the plan began. He arranged his affairs. Told the world he had lost his sight due to complications from an illness. Elizabeth was shocked, or at least she acted shocked. Her words were sympathetic, her voice soft, but Jimmy could hear the slight tremor of inconvenience in it. The kind that says, "Oh no, what now?" And as he sat in that darkened room, pretending not to see the woman he'd spent 13 years beside, Jimmy realized the irony. The man who'd built his life on a lie was about to die chasing the truth. But what Jimmy didn't know was that Elizabeth had her own secrets too, secrets darker than he ever imagined, and as he played blind, she was already planning something that would make his world collapse before his illness ever could. One night, about 2 weeks after the blindness announcement, Jimmy decided to push the test a little further. He sat alone in the living room, pretending to be lost in thought. The lights were dim. Soft jazz played in the background, the playlist Elizabeth liked to leave on for guests, to make the house feel alive. He heard her heels approaching softly, like she was tiptoeing. He stayed quiet. He felt her move right in front of him. He could feel her gaze on his face, scanning him, weighing him. Then she did something that made his heart freeze. She waved her hand quickly, very close to his face. So close that, under normal circumstances, reflex alone would make anyone blink. Jimmy held still, not a blink. Not a twitch. He heard her exhale a small, satisfied breath. So, she was testing him. But for what? To see if he was truly blind? Or to see how much she could get away with? Later that night, Jimmy pretended to fall asleep early, his breathing slow, his body still, eyes shut. Elizabeth lay beside him for a while, scrolling through her phone. He could feel the light from the screen flicker through his half-closed eyelids. Then, after maybe 30 minutes, he heard the faint buzz of a text. Her body shifted. She sat up slowly. The bed moved, then came a whisper, almost too soft to catch, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." His heart pounded that he wanted to open his eyes, ask, "Where?" But the role of the blind man held him hostage. The mattress lifted as she got up. A wardrobe door opened gently, then closed. Her footsteps moved toward the door, then stopped. Silence. Jimmy wondered if she was looking at him, checking if he was really asleep. He kept his breaths even. A few seconds later, the bedroom door clicked open, and Elizabeth left. Now, here's where many men would explode. That they'd jump up, storm out, confront her in the driveway, shout, accuse, expose. Jimmy didn't. He got up quietly. He moved slowly, using the cane as a prop in case someone saw him, but his steps were precise. He knew every inch of this house. He'd bought it when they were still pretending to be a happy couple. He stopped at the top of the staircase, leaned against the rail, and listened. There it was, the sound of her heels again. Faster this time, and beneath that, another sound. A door closing. The front door. He heard the beep of the security system as she disabled the alarm for herself. Then the soft thud of the door as it shut. Through the narrow glass beside the stairs, he could see her, just faintly, walking briskly across the driveway to her car, hair tied up. Phone to her ear. No sadness. No stress, just purpose. The engine roared to life, and the car disappeared into the night. Jimmy stood there, gripping the rail. His vision wasn't perfect anymore, the illness was making him weaker by the day, but it was still good enough to see the truth that had always been there. A wife who never really belonged to him, leaving her blind husband alone in a mansion, at midnight, with a secret on her lips. But where was she going? To whom? And why did she sound excited? The next morning, Elizabeth returned before sunrise. She walked into the room smelling like a different perfume. Not hers. Someone else's cologne mixed faintly with the floral scent she used to cover it. Jimmy lay still, eyes closed. She moved quietly, almost guilty. Shoes off. Bag placed down gently. Bathroom tap turned on for a few seconds, the universal sound of someone pretending they'd been here all along. Then she slipped back into bed, the mattress dipped, her back turned to him. For a moment, Jimmy considered saying her name. Asking where she'd been. But no. It was too early, that if he reacted too soon, she'd become careful. And he needed her to relax, that he needed her to show her real face. So he waited. Because the cruelest part of all of this wasn't her leaving, that it was wondering whether she'd been doing this for years, when he could actually see. As days turned into weeks, the pattern repeated, the caring wife by day, the disappearing stranger by night. Sometimes, she'd leave for meetings. Sometimes, it was dinner with a friend. Other times, she didn't even bother making excuses, she just said, I need air. This whole situation is suffocating me. Suffocating her, the healthy one. Jimmy listened more than he spoke, that he overheard her on the phone, arguing with someone about timing, about papers, about not being ready yet. Papers. His will, the properties, shares. One evening, the family lawyer, Barrister Sam, came to visit. A calm man in his early 50s, with kind eyes and a beard that made him look wiser than he probably was. Elizabeth asked me to stop by, he said carefully when Jimmy greeted him. Oh. Jimmy replied, pretending to look slightly above his head the way blind people often do. What for? Just some estate planning questions, Sam answered. Given your condition, she's understandably concerned about the future. Of course she was. Jimmy smiled politely. That's thoughtful of her, he said. But inside, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Estate planning. Secret midnight outings. Test waving fingers in his face. Something bigger was unfolding, and he was at the center of it, without being invited. Yet, in the middle of this storm, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while Elizabeth was out, the housekeeper, Amaka, came into his study. Sir, she said softly, can I speak? Jimmy nodded. Of course. Sit. She hesitated. No, sir. I'll stand. This one. I don't know if it's my place. Say it anyway, Jimmy replied. Amaka swallowed hard. You are a good man. You have helped many people. Drivers, cleaners, security, all of us. We talk. We see things. We may be poor, but we are not blind. The irony of that line almost made Jimmy laugh. What are you trying to tell me? He asked. She looked toward the door, then back at him. Be careful, sir, she whispered. Not everyone in this house loves you. Some love your money. Some love what your name can do for them. He heard fear in her voice. Real fear, as if speaking the truth in this house was a dangerous thing. Are you talking about Elizabeth? He pressed gently. Amaka froze, her lips parted, then closed again. I'm just a housekeeper, sir. I don't want trouble, she murmured. But, if you ever need help, if you ever feel unsafe, she took a breath, please call this number. She slipped a small, folded piece of paper into his hand that he could feel her fingers tremble. Jimmy unfolded it after she left. There was a number but no name. He needed to uncover the truth soon. The clock struck 11:47 p.m. The mansion was silent, too silent. Outside, the rain whispered against the windows, and thunder rolled in the distance like a warning from heaven itself. Jimmy sat in his study, pretending to be asleep on the couch. The lights were dim, just enough to make the security cameras think no one was awake. His cane rested beside him, his breathing steady. He had learned Elizabeth's patterns well. When she was guilty, she became predictable, and tonight, he could feel it, that nervous energy, that carefulness in her footsteps, the way she moved through the hall as if afraid of her own echo. Then came the sound, the faint click of the wardrobe door. The zipper of a handbag. The light shuffle of expensive heels being slipped on. Jimmy's heart thumped. He listened, every sound a breadcrumb leading to the truth. The front door opened. Closed softly. Moments later, he heard the hum of her car. This time, he didn't wait. He rose quietly, slipped into a dark coat, and picked up his phone. He dialed the number a marker had given him. 1 ring. 2. Then a voice, calm, deep, familiar. "Mr. James?" "Yes," Jimmy whispered. "Who is this?" "Detective Ignatius. A marker told me you might call. I used to work security for your father-in-law before I joined private investigation." Jimmy inhaled sharply. That name, his father-in-law, the same man whose empire Elizabeth had always felt excluded from. "Where is she going tonight?" Jimmy asked quietly. The detective's tone hardened. "That's what I've been trying to confirm. She's been meeting someone, regularly." Jimmy's throat tightened. "Who?" "I'll send you a live feed. Do not call her. Do not react. Just watch." A notification pinged on his phone. A link. Jimmy opened it. The screen loaded slowly, painfully slowly. Then, there she was. Elizabeth. His wife of 13 years, stepping out of her car, into a private villa lit by low garden lights. The camera followed her as she walked through the gate, confident, not hiding, like someone who belonged there. Inside, another figure appeared. A man tall. Broad shoulders. Familiar posture. For a second, Jimmy's heart stopped. He leaned closer, squinting through the shadows on the screen. Then the man turned. And Jimmy's world tilted. It was his lawyer. Barrister Sam. The same man who had told Jimmy that Elizabeth wanted to discuss estate planning. The man who had managed his businesses for years. The one person Jimmy trusted to protect his legacy. Now there he was, standing in a dimly lit room, holding Elizabeth's hand. Jimmy felt something inside him crack. Not anger, not pain, but something deeper. Betrayal. That quiet, corrosive kind that eats you alive in silence. He turned up the phone's volume just enough to catch their voices. "He suspects nothing. I tested him again yesterday. No reaction. He's completely blind," Elizabeth said. "Good," replied Sam. "We need to move quickly before anyone else gets involved. The transfer papers are ready." "And the will?" she asked. Sam said, "I've drafted a new one. It names you as sole beneficiary. Once he signs it, everything will be under your control." Elizabeth, smiling faintly, "Perfect. And when that's done? Then we'll go public. I'll handle the announcement. A grieving widow deserves sympathy." Jimmy's breath caught. He had expected betrayal. But not this. Not the woman he loved plotting his death with the man he trusted most. Jimmy dropped the phone. His entire body went cold. The screen flickered on the floor, showing Elizabeth's face, calm, composed, cruelly beautiful. They weren't just planning to take his money, they were planning to take his life. The next morning, Elizabeth was back in bed, lying beside him as if nothing had happened. When Jimmy opened his eyes, she smiled softly, brushing his cheek. "Good morning," she whispered. He forced a smile. "Morning." She handed him a cup of tea. "Drink. It'll help with the headaches." Jimmy stared at the cup for a moment too long. "Thank you," he said, and placed it down gently on the table beside him. He could smell something strange in it. Something faintly metallic, bitter under the aroma of honey and herbs. He knew, and yet, he pretended not to. Because sometimes, pretending to be blind was safer than seeing the truth. That day, he called Detective Ignatius again. "I have proof," Jimmy said quietly. "But I need to know why." "Why her? Why Sam?" Ignatius' voice was steady. "They've been involved for over a year, sir. Started as business meetings about your investments. Then it got personal. And when your illness came up, Jimmy interrupted. Wait, you said when my illness came up? How did she know? There was a pause. Sir, she paid one of your doctors to leak the information. She knew about the cancer before you told anyone. Jimmy's heart sank. So that was it. That's why she was so quick to adjust to his blindness, why she seemed prepared, why she moved through the house like someone who already knew the ending. Elizabeth wasn't reacting, she was executing. That night, Jimmy made his move. He asked Elizabeth to call Sam for dinner. A small thank you, he said, for helping with all the paperwork. She hesitated. Then smiled. Of course, darling. That's so thoughtful. At 8 p.m., Sam arrived. In his usual suit, calm as ever, Jimmy greeted him warmly, pretending to fumble with his cane. They ate together. Laughed. Even Elizabeth poured the wine. Sam made a toast to friendship, he said. Jimmy smiled to trust. But underneath the table, Jimmy's phone was recording. Every word. Every pause. Every lie. Later that evening, after dinner, Jimmy pretended to grow tired. I'll rest, he said, standing up slowly. Thank you, both. As he walked toward his room, he heard their whispers. Elizabeth whispered, he'll sign the will tomorrow. Jimmy closed the bedroom door quietly, his face blank, but his mind was a storm. He uploaded the recording to a secure drive and sent a copy to Detective Ignatius. Because Jimmy knew one thing, people like Elizabeth don't stop until they win, and if she believed he was dying, he could use that belief against her. But as Jimmy planned his revenge, he didn't know something crucial. Someone else in that mansion, someone who had seen everything, was also keeping a secret. Someone who had been quietly protecting him. And that person would soon risk everything to expose the truth. Because Elizabeth and Sam weren't the only ones watching Jimmy. Someone else was too. And what they would uncover next would turn the hunter into the hunted. Hours passed. The mansion slept, except for Amaka. She crept down the hall, heart racing, clutching her phone. From the cracked doorway she saw Elizabeth slip into the study again. Daniels was already there. Amaka pressed record, catching every word. The next morning, sunlight poured weakly through the curtains. Elizabeth entered the bedroom with a trembling breath, rehearsing her grief. She touched Jimmy's arm. It was cool, not icy, but still enough for her to gasp. His chest rose only slightly, a slow, shallow rhythm from the sedative he had taken. She didn't know that the doctor, Detective Ignatius' contact, had given Jimmy a harmless medication the night before. It slowed his pulse and breathing, creating the illusion of lifelessness. Elizabeth cried out, her voice breaking just enough to sound real. Jimmy! No, please, no. Footsteps thundered through the hall. Staff rushed in. She clutched him, sobbing, tears falling onto a man who could hear every word. Call the doctor. He's gone. From a hidden earpiece, Ignatius' calm voice whispered into Jimmy's ear. Hold still, sir. We're in position. Moments later, police cars rolled quietly through the gates. Barrister Sam arrived minutes after the call went out. He stormed in, face painted with shock, then pulled Elizabeth into his arms. Everything was unfolding exactly as Jimmy and Ignatius had planned. And then the final act began. Police officers stepped into the room. We need to ask a few questions. Elizabeth stuttered. Please, not now, my husband. It seems as if someone played a recording and she heard her own voice clearly. He's asleep. It'll happen by morning. Elizabeth froze. Sam turned pale. Before they could speak, the officers stepped forward with cuffs. You're both under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to defraud. The room spun around them. And that was when the bed creaked. Elizabeth turned, her breath caught. Jimmy sat up. The color drained from her face. Why, you're alive? He stood, removing the pulse monitor from his wrist. Very much alive, he said softly. You should have known, Elizabeth. I only pretended to be blind. Why wouldn't I learn how to play dead too? Detective Ignatius entered behind him, a thin smile on his face. It's over. Elizabeth collapsed to her knees. Sam tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Jimmy looked at them one last time. I gave you 13 years, he said quietly. You gave me poison. Now we're even. Morning came differently that day. Elizabeth and Sam were gone. The sirens had faded into the distance hours ago, leaving behind the echo of disbelief and the faint smell of burnt lies. Jimmy sat in the study, staring at the morning light spilling across the floor. Amaka stood a few feet away, her eyes red from sleeplessness. She didn't know whether to speak or to keep silent. Jimmy saved her the trouble. "Thank you," he said softly. "If you hadn't given me that number," Amaka shook her head. "You saved yourself, sir. I only gave you what you already had, a chance." He smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it, only exhaustion. Detective Ignatius arrived later that morning, carrying a folder thick with paperwork, evidence, reports, statements. He placed it on the desk between them. "They've both confessed," he said quietly. "She admitted to poisoning your tea. The lab confirmed traces of the compound. You're lucky you stopped when you did." Jimmy leaned back, eyes closed, breathing in deeply. Lucky. That word sounded strange now. Lucky to have been betrayed and still be standing. Lucky to have survived love that tried to kill him? Maybe that's what luck really was, surviving the things that should have broken you. "What happens to them now?" he asked finally. Samuel sighed. "They'll face trial. Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. The evidence is solid. It's over." Over. Two small syllables, but to Jimmy, they felt heavier than all his billions. Days passed. The mansion, once full of polished perfection, now felt hollowed as he walked through its halls and saw ghosts everywhere. The dining room where she laughed, the balcony where she kissed him under the moonlight, not out of love, but out of strategy, the study where she plotted his death while pretending to arrange his legacy. Each memory stung, but none hurt more than the quiet moments of almost love, the times he thought she might have cared, the mornings she brewed coffee just the way he liked it, the times she smiled without a reason, or so he thought. He began to realize that love isn't always what it looks like. Sometimes it's an illusion built by two desperate people trying to make their lies look like affection. A week later, Jimmy visited the hospital for his routine checkup. The doctors were surprised. The cancer hadn't spread. In fact, it had stabilized. "Your body's responding unusually well," the specialist said. "It's like you've been given a second chance." Jimmy smiled faintly. Maybe facing death had forced his body to fight harder for life. As he walked out of the hospital, he looked at the people passing by, couples holding hands, parents with children, strangers laughing about small things. For the first time in years, he envied simplicity. He realized then that all his life, he had chased noise, fame, wealth, admiration, when all he ever wanted was peace. That evening, he called Amaka to his study. She came nervously, expecting instructions. Instead, Jimmy handed her an envelope. Inside were legal documents and a key. "What's this, sir?" she asked, confused. "Your house," Jimmy said simply. "It's in your name now. Fully paid. And a trust fund for your son, for school, for life. You've earned it." Tears filled her eyes. "Sir, I can't accept this." "You can," he said, smiling gently. "Because you're the only one who stayed when everyone else had a price." Amaka cried softly, clutching the envelope like it was made of glass. "Thank you," she whispered, but Jimmy wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze drifted to the window, to the evening sky blushing with orange and gold. For once, he didn't feel alone. A few months later, the trial concluded. Elizabeth was sentenced to 25 years, Sam received 20. The courtroom was packed, but Jimmy didn't attend the final hearing. He didn't need to. Justice wasn't something he wanted to watch. It was something he'd already felt. He did, however, send a letter, one that the court allowed to be read aloud before sentencing. It said, "To Elizabeth, I loved you once, not because you deserved it, but because I didn't know how not to. You taught me that love without truth is just a contract. You tried to end my life, but in doing so, you gave me a new one. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine, because I refuse to carry your poison in my heart any longer." When the letter ended, even the judge sat silent for a long moment, and somewhere inside the courtroom, Elizabeth, once a vision of wealth and beauty, broke down completely. For the first time in her life, she cried real tears. But forgiveness, like love, had come too late. Months turned into a year. Jimmy sold the mansion and donated half his wealth to a foundation supporting young athletes who couldn't afford their dreams, boys like he once was. The other half went into quiet investments. He moved into a smaller house by the coast. A single-story home with white walls, wooden floors, and the sound of waves instead of the hum of machines. He didn't need staff, just peace. Sometimes a marker visited, bringing her son. They'd sit by the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. Thank you for watching. Please take a second, yes, you, to hit that subscribe button. Subscribe now, and be here when the next chapter drops.